price list or the quality of the receiving waters?
Different funding programs may have some limiting eligibility criteria. Population, MHI.
MHI is...
Thank you. Median household income. Generally speaking, I think all the funding agencies, when they look at the problem that the project is going to address, the stronger the documented problem, I think that the more competitive their application is going to be.
And so if there's a water quality problem the community is generally aware of, but isn't documented on one of those lists, it's not helping getting funding for that problem.
No, but it might be possible to actually generate the documentation to give to DEC so they can amend the priority water body list and get that problem added.
Right, thanks. And a sort of related question, if I can.
I just want to remind you, come to the mic, even though we're going to do, I was going to ask some general questions to frame it, but we'd like to get the question on camera. So far we've been asking about quality, priority water bodies, just so the audience knows, because we're going to post this on Kingston Citizens, and the relationship to qualifying for funding. Go ahead.
So another sort of technical question, very similar though. If the water quality, if the project is going to improve water quality in a Class B water versus a Class C water, so for the audience, that's water designated for swimming versus fishing, say. Does that affect the score of the project as well in these?
It could. The scoring system gets a little complicated, and sitting here, I can't recall, but in both intended use plans, the detailed scoring system is spelled out completely in one of the appendices to the intended use plan.
Thank you.
Okay.
So just to sort of wrap up and frame the audience participation portion of this discussion, I'd like to actually get a sense of who's in the audience tonight. How many people here are from Kingston? Okay, great. And Woodstock? And where else are we from? Oh, town of Ulster, I know that, right? How many of you are elected officials or serve on a board or commission? Great. And how many of you are, and this may overlap with all the other things, how many of you are environmental professionals in some way? Okay, great. Did I miss anything? I see a lot of people are asking very well-informed questions, that's why I wanted to get a sense of who's in our audience. And how many of you are on Kingston Citizens mailing list? Okay, great. The rest of you have to sign up. But I'm glad you found out about this. So I wanted to actually begin by just asking some general overview questions of both of you. And thank you so much for really informative 101 all the way to $18 million questions. By the way, the MHI, you've just learned a new acronym for Kingston, is $44,000. So we might be eligible for hardship funding. So starting with water supply, this is a question that how is it changing? How's the water supply, the way that we manage it, the way that we monitor it, the way that we maintain it, how is that changing as a result of the growth that we see and it's just sort of a general question, as a result of the growth or changes in our landscape? Just a very opening question, for either of you.
I can't talk to specifics, but things that I can relate to the question. For drinking water systems, State Department of Environmental Conservation and the State Department of Health both have roles. State Department of Environmental Conservation regulates the taking of water for drinking water purposes. And they also, as we were just talking about, monitor the water quality of water bodies. And to the extent that those water bodies are polluted and can't be used for the designated purpose that that particular water body is classified as, they document that. So State Department, and I don't know what the trends are as time is going on and populations are growing and shifting. But the State Department of Health has the role of regulating the quality of the water that's being delivered for potable purposes. And they're administering regulations and laws that come from the federal government down to the state. Those, again, not on specifics, but using one of Candace's examples, was Arkville for arsenic. The regulation was changed to limit more restrictively the level of arsenic in the public drinking water. Okay, that's been going on for decades, where there's either a new contaminant that's being regulated or an existing contaminant that's being regulated, but it's being that the allowable amount is being reduced. So it's just the growing burden on the infrastructure owner to have to make sure that to comply, they need more technology to provide that product that's meeting the regulators' requirements and keep the environment and the public healthy.
So actually, Candace, you gave many examples of communities that you work in the area. Would you say that there's an increasing burden on them in terms of the way that they have to manage or maintain the infrastructure? Or how would you characterize what you've seen over time in terms of how they have to deal with managing their water infrastructure?
That was a real specific example about the arsenic that had a measurable financial and managerial and technical impact on that community. But as a rule, the kinds of things that I'm seeing are a little different than you might see in a more larger community. Since we work with so many small communities, what they're facing is some demographic changes, and instead of seeing people moving into the area, they're seeing people move out of the area. And so they're supporting an infrastructure with fewer users. So it's a financial burden.
Right. And is there, so for either of you, what is the role of the government, how has the role of the government changed to meet that gap? And I guess the question is, how is it doing so, or is it doing so?
I wouldn't say the role has changed so much. I mean, I think they're being challenged to, I think people are finally, you always hear, well, water's free, and I always say, yeah, it is, but the pipes that bring it to you aren't. So I think that people are coping or dealing with the fact that it costs more than they wanted it to deal with. So what's happening is you're seeing people raising their rates a lot. And these funding programs assume, when they say a target service charge, and let's say they're looking at your median household income, and by the way, the median household income is if you just surveyed everybody in an area and you ranked their incomes from low to high, it's the one in the middle. So let's take a particular median household income of, say, $50,000, and it's not unusual to see an affordability factor nationally or statewide of somewhere between 1 and 2% of that. So let's call it 1.5%. And so now we're looking at $750, and you're charging $3. Well, they're not going to bring you that great financing if you aren't paying what they think you ought to be paying. So what it translates into is rising rates.
Actually, I'd be very interested in hearing more about rates, because in the Kingston system, we're talking about the fact that the rates might have to go up to support the cost of infrastructure charges. And at present, we are, I guess you could say, we're not. They're struggling to meet that demand because, in fact, water usage has gone down. And so I was wondering if we could talk just for a moment about different rate structures, and just ask you, either of you, what you're seeing as the best practice for that. Since you brought that up, we were going to talk about that a little later, but I'd be interested in. We have a descending rate structure. So if you use more, you pay less per gallon than if you use less. And so could you just describe the different types of rate structures for people?
Yeah, I'll answer that generically, because I meant to put a slide together for you, and it was getting kind of long, the presentation.
Just very generally.
But so what she's getting at is that there's different rate structures, and some people charge more the more water you use, and that's an increasing rate structure. Some people charge less the more water you use, and that's a decreasing rate structure. And we advocate a level rate structure, and we also advocate, you might be in a community that charges, they give you a certain amount of, they'll give you X gallons for Y dollars, and then they start charging you per gallon after that. We actually advocate not only a rate structure, but a per gallon charge, so that there isn't any base usage. For example, you're
Right.
paying for what you get.
Yeah.
And it's called full cost pricing.
So what does that do, for example, what does that do, how does that play out in the
Well,
community?
the way I look at it is, and I can't wait to hear what Fred hops in here with, that basically at the end of the day, you've got a certain amount of fixed costs, and those are your personnel costs. For example, you've got an operator and their health benefits, and you've got administrators, and you've got billing costs, and you've got transportation costs, and then you've got treatment costs. And let's say you're using less water, so you might save something in chemicals. And of course, the bigger systems might see more savings, as for example, we're talking water for a minute. As you use less water, you might be using less chemicals, less energy. In a small system, that doesn't translate that much. At the end of the day, you've still got a nut you've got to crack. You have your $100,000 budget, and you have to get that. So if people are using less water, say, because you've got an increasing rate structure, or however it is, they're using less water, hoping to bring their bill down, you end up having to charge more per gallon because you've still got to get your $100,000. And that's how you're getting your revenue, is from the users.
Okay. Did you want to add something to this?
We don't get involved in rate studies, but as Candace is talking, I'm thinking about my personal experience with some small communities. Some small communities have just have a simple flat rate. If you want water, here's how much we're going to charge you for the year. And in the old days, maybe that was simple enough to meet a more simple situation, but things aren't simple anymore. Some communities might charge a flat rate for the first quantity of water, and then provide a surcharge for anything above that. I don't know if this exists in water systems, but I know in wastewater, sometimes the expense, the charge that's put on a property owner, might be more than just metered water. It might also be based in part on property values to support the revenue, to generate the revenue to support the system.
So actually, you both brought up the topic of asset management, and we are about to undergo some work by a consultant for the City of Kingston, looking at our asset management, and that's for the clean water, or in other words, wastewater treatment plant, which, by the way, for those of you who aren't familiar, it is the most expensive piece of infrastructure for the City of Kingston to run. It was found in our climate action plan that it's about 30% of the energy usage that the municipality is responsible for. And we also found recently from visits by FEMA that the cost of repairs to the plant would be 3 times more than we had thought for dealing with flood proofing and the fact that it's in harm's way in the floodplain, which is normal in communities because it's at the lowest point. So instead of $2 million, we're going to be looking at $6 million for that. And so there's a lot of long-term costs associated with our wastewater treatment plant, which so this makes it especially timely. But if you could tell us a little bit about how asset management works in the communities that you work with and what exactly you do to work with them.
I put a couple slides together because I know that you're going to ask this question, so...
These are softballs.
I wanted to start just because I think it's kind of interesting, and people don't necessarily understand. And again, I use drinking water as the example here, but what you might find in a typical budget and where your dollars are going. And so you've got your water operator and other paid assistants and some associated costs there. Your power and pumping electricity can often be a really big part of your budget. Purification, chemicals, chlorine, et cetera, transmission and distribution, repairing and replacing those assets, and equipment and supplies, things like your truck, your computer tools, security, fencing and lighting, your loan repayment, that debt repayment is part of your budget, and things like landscaping and grading. And I just wanted to set you up for this. So what's asset management about? It's getting the most value from your equipment, and estimating your schedule and your costs for rehabilitation and replacement, so you're not caught unawares. You're not fixing things that break all the time. It costs more to fix something that breaks than it does to plan for its replacement in a timely manner. So this is reducing cost, increasing efficiency and reliability, and providing a quick recovery from unexpected failures. So what do we mean by an asset? Let's take a look again from a water system point of view. Pipes for your water pipes, your distribution pipes, your buildings, your treatment building, your pump stations, tanks, your storage tanks, reservoirs, equipment like motors and mixers and pumps and valves, security like controls and lighting and fencing, and tools like your vehicles and wrenches and things I threw in here, office and lab, just to make sure, computers are a big part in your computer controls, computerized controls actually, and your equipment. These are all assets. These are all things that you've invested your money into to operate your system, and it's really important that you recognize that they, A, have a lifespan, B, that they can be really hard to replace in an emergency situation, so you want to know where they are and how to get them really quick if they do fail. If it's not something that you can keep a duplicate of in the back, it's something that you want to be sure that you can replace quickly in an emergency situation, and you also need to think about financing for these replacements. So one of the first things you do, the first thing you do really, is an inventory. And you want to identify what your assets are and prioritize those critical assets, those ones that you're going to be really in trouble if they fail and you don't have a backup plan for handling them, or you don't have any money in the kitty for paying for that replacement. And so many, talking about some things that communities are struggling with, in the past they might have had an asset reserve account or a capital reserve account, and now they're on a shoestring. They're not having any money in the bank to handle some of these things. It's like you've got a car and it breaks down, and holy cow, I don't have that $800 for the timing belt. So, I got timing belts on the mind, I just did one. But it's a good example of something that leaves you in trouble, and that it's got to be done. And it's something people can relate to as their car. So you're identifying where in the facility, where these assets are located. Many small communities don't have a map. Many big communities don't have very good maps. So it's real important to know where your assets are, what they are, where they're located, and what their condition is. Are they in good condition, okay condition, or bad condition? That's what we do. There's different ways that you can rate them, but we like the 1, 2, 3. It keeps it kind of simple. There's all kinds of software for tracking and managing assets, but in a simplest way to look at it, you're looking, good, bad, or not so good, or really bad, going to fail imminently. And the age and the expected useful life. So you can look at, there's schedules, for example, the EPA will publish a schedule, I don't think I put it on here, but what's an expected useful life for a particular asset, and you're like, okay, it's supposed to be 20 years, and this thing is 40 years old. That's something we need to be thinking about. You put a check mark next to that one. And how much does it cost? Is it something that, we're only talking $10,000, or we're talking $400,000 or something, that's so you're looking at a lot of things, and you've got a grid where you're looking all that, and that's what this inventory list gives you an opportunity to figure out and prioritize some of these replacement needs, and start saving money and setting up individual accounts and putting some money aside. Many communities don't do that, and they need to do that. Many municipalities say, I haven't raised water rates, re-elect me. Not good. Not good. It's like everything. You need to continually keep pace with the cost of running your system. And one of the ways you do that is by increasing your rates to recognize that things cost more as you move forward. And that at the time, it may not fail this year or next year. It might fail in 5 years. What's it going to cost in 5 years? So you're also projecting future costs.
Thank you for that bit of extra homework. You get a bonus point for that. This is fantastic. We're going to, by the way...
I'm not done. Wait. Actually, I don't have much, but the replacement planning, age and expected life, long-term planning. I guess, I wanted to talk about long-term versus short-term planning, so that you've got short-term and long-term assets, and you've got long-term rehabilitation and capital reserve accounts, and you've got a short-term asset reserve account. And you want to have the name of what you're replacing on that account, so people aren't coming in and saying, hey, you have some extra money in your water budget, we need it over here in highway. Can we borrow it for a while? And you want to have dedicated reserve accounts, is my point. And there's your rate increases and borrowing. Okay.
Well, that's great. Thank you. How lucky we are to have you here. So now, going to the, well, first of all, this is great because we're about to embark on that. And I was wondering, for example, with the EFC, since, by the way, John Sorensen is also here from the EFC and brought with him, thank you, John, a list of the things that Kingston has borrowed from the revolving funds for over the last, I guess, so many years, since 94 and 98 from the both funds. So this is available for anybody who wants it. And our PowerPoints will be, these PowerPoints will be available on the Kingston Citizens website. But I just wanted to get to you, Fred, with the question of asset management. Now, I realize you work with the smaller rural communities, but how would EFC work with a community like Kingston on asset management of this type, or at least advising or providing technical assistance?
We mostly would be urging them to do that.
Okay.
And we're not there to replace the consultants or advisors they're going to need to do asset management plans. But it's asset management plans is a fortunately a growing phenomenon. Definitely most small systems, Kingston being more of a mid-sized communities, it wasn't done in the past, and there's a growing interest to do this, and I know the DEC is starting to work on a plan that eventually it's going to be required.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and I don't know about the drinking water side, if the same kind of initiative is underway, but it's with this asset management plan that, without going through the exercise, as Candace said, smaller systems can make do with more simple asset management plans versus bigger ones, which need a little more complicated ones. You can't predict. The infrastructure owners cannot predict where they're going to be in the future, what the expenses are going to be, what will rates have to be, how soon will they have to raise rates. This is all in the name of avoiding crisis, whether it's a infrastructure crisis that has to be dealt with or a financial crisis. Now, the risk can't be reduced down to zero. We don't live in a perfect world, but the asset management plans will take them a long way towards understanding their system and forecasting what's going to be happening. And the other important thing about asset management plans, they're a live plan, meaning you do not come up with one, stick it on the shelf, and forget about it. It does no good to have an asset management plan that is not revisited and updated consistently.
That's great. That's very useful, because what we're understanding is that you're trying to incorporate, the state is trying to incorporate best practices into the system of rating and awarding funding as well, I assume, in terms of, for example, the Smart Growth Infrastructure Act. That's part of the way that you evaluate the proposals. Is that not?
Correct.
So, for those who are interested, we can also post the link to that. But essentially, that is about the idea that communities should invest where they already exist, rather than sprawling. So it's a way of, with policy and funding, supporting our existing investments in existing communities, rather than increasing what will be a long-term burden for communities, as Candace so aptly described, because our economic base and our population base in rural areas is shrinking. So actually, I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience, and let's see what this generates in terms of discussion. Please come up to the mic. Anyone? At all? Oh, come on, Rachel. By the way, we all know each other. Please say your name when you come up to the mic.
Hi, thank you for coming. I'm going to bring up something. My name is Rachel Marco Havens, and I'm going to bring up something that's been on my mind for a while. Can you talk a little bit, and I'm sorry because we're not talking about Kingston, but I'm not asking about Kingston, but can you talk a little bit about what's going on in New Paltz regarding wastewater Do you guys know anything about what's happening with the wastewater plant that's
I do
planned
not.
in New Paltz? You don't? Okay. And I had one more possible question. Oh, so you were talking earlier about smart growth. What does that mean environmentally?
Oh my.
I mean, do
Would
you
you like
have
a dissertation
anything
or-
there? So
Sorry?
is that part of in smart growth? I mean, is that part of looking at?
Let me address that. So, if we're looking at a project that involves new infrastructure, whether it's a brand new system, where there once was no sewer system, or there's an existing sewer system, but they're going to expand it to increase the size of the surface area, what we're looking for is the expansion of the surface area of the newly served area. Has it been planned? Has the local government planned for growth in that area? Or is it ag properties that the local government hasn't even thought about allowing for growth and subdivision of property? So we're looking to see that the local government has considered impacts on the environment and the community as a result of growth. Was it planned for? Is there a comprehensive plan, for example? So again, we're just looking for checks that the community has made as to, we're trying to avoid situations where you have uncontrolled sprawl that will have potential adverse impacts. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Right, and Rachel, if when we get that course started, we can talk a little bit about smart growth in relationship to sprawl in the sort of post-war era in America, which is that we've really built on a system of growth outside of cities, and that has been a very costly infrastructure to maintain. It's a very big topic, so if you Google smart growth, you'll find a lot about it, and we'll talk about it when we do future educational discussions with Kingston citizens about sustainable development. Rachel? Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you. I am Rebecca. Thank you so much for coming this evening. Can you speak a little bit to intermunicipal partnerships and how funding may increase or what the benefits of that sort of thing might be?
Okay. So many times the applicants for state revolving fund financings want to build infrastructure that will connect to another government's infrastructure. So, for example, a town might want to put in sewers where there were no sewers, but there's a treatment plant owned by another municipality that they could use, and that municipality has the capacity to take this other town's wastewater, and they come together, they reach an agreement on what kind of services we provide for what rates. If that kind of situation is involved, okay, as a lender, we want to see that there's capacity at that treatment plant to take this proposed wastewater, that the two communities have already talked, because ultimately, before we can provide the financing, we're going to want to actually see an intermunicipal agreement, an actual legal contract that's drawn up between the two parties. Each party's interests are protected. Basically says this town is going to generate wastewater, they're going to build the pipes, and they will connect to this municipality's system at this particular point, and that this municipality is going to take that wastewater, as an example, will take that wastewater, treat it through their wastewater system, and dispose of it appropriately. And for the service that this community is providing this community, there will be a fee. Here's how much it's going to cost. And this community can't discharge more than X number of gallons a day to this community, that kind of arrangement. So the kind of tying in spark growth, and there was one of the grant sources here. The Department of State has this local government efficiency grant program. The idea is if there's a treatment plant nearby, it may be best for everyone, the environment, the community, to make use of that treatment plant in lieu of having this community over here not only build sewers, build another treatment plant with another point discharge. So we want to see that kind of consideration made.
Right, so there were some discussions in Kingston and Ulster about looking at that sort of collaboration in the past, especially when the Hudson Landing project began. I don't know where those discussions are today, but we could ask some more questions about that. Also, a comprehensive plan can engage another community under municipal law to actually generate intermunicipal agreements as part of the plan. So one of the things we're going to be recommending as citizens on before Thursday, when the comments are due for the Kingston Comprehensive Plan, is that they take a look at infrastructure and potential agreements with other communities to protect and or manage or maintain our existing infrastructure. Brad, did you have a question? Brad Will is one of our aldermen in Kingston.
Thank you very much, Candace and Fred, for coming tonight, taking time out of your busy schedule. It's been very informative. I think this should be mandatory attendance for all municipal leaders to understand these problems and opportunities. So I was just looking at the sheet of the drinking water, clean water state revolving funds, and there are about 14 items on here over the past 21 years. Loans that were granted and used for capital improvement projects. And I'm noticing out of the 14, there are 3 that were originated from the Kingston Water Department. And they all happened in 2012. And the range of these is from under $500,000 to a much larger figure, 5.7 million, 6.2 sewer from 2010. So my question is, in the dealings, since there are only 3 out from the originating from the Kingston Water Department, are you in close contact, or are there ongoing communications or applications beyond these 3? The only 3 out of these 14 from the Kingston Water Department in looking at some SRF funding.
I myself haven't worked with the City of Kingston. I don't know the details of these financings, but I know the water district is referenced here, but no doubt the City of Kingston was the borrower, not the water district.
And do water districts themselves work directly with you? Was it always through the municipality, the town, or the city?
Who representing the city was involved with we're talking about drinking water systems, so this would be the city dealing with some people in our office and the State Department of Health for the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. So I don't know if the primary players were ultimately water district. Is there a water board?
Yes.
Yes.
So it was the
Yes,
water
so
board people?
they're independent from the city.
Again, I'm presuming the City of Kingston was the borrower, because the borrower needs to have the ability to issue bonds.
That's right, so the Common Council would have to approve that bond.
Well, I'd like to see more activity and more involvement and more coordination so that we are on top of the opportunities, because we have a large backlog of infrastructure improvements that we need to be making. So I look forward to working with you.
Absolutely.
The city should look forward to that. And the other, just quick follow-up question. We have a flooding task force that looked at conditions down along the Rhine, down the Hudson River, the mouth to the Hudson. And historically it's been very industrial, and there's still a large industrial presence there. Are there funding mechanisms or ways to assist with businesses and private property owners to help alleviate or mitigate flooding problems where either sensitive operations are occurring?
Not through EFC. I don't,
The Brownfields Opportunity Areas was available for a long time, but I'm sorry, go on.
but there may be, I referenced several times tonight the consolidated funding application. So this is a web-based funding application that was started by the governor's office and relates to the Regional Economic Development Council initiatives. You know what I'm talking about? Okay. It's a web-based funding application that applicants use to access a multitude of programs. 2 of our programs are in there. There may be programs through the CFA that we don't administer that might be available for that kind of initiative. I don't know anything in particular, but there's so many funding programs.
Sorry, the CDBG? No?
I didn't want to say it out loud because I'm not sure. I mean, one of the programs, in fact, I want to go to the slide because it kind of harks back to that co-municipal.
The local governance. I just wanted to mention, Kingston is going through its Brownfield Opportunity Areas Step 3 assessment for the waterfront, which is a generic environmental impact study and of great magnitude, which will allow business and property owners to move through the seeker process more quickly through having this generic environmental impact study available.
And that's through DEC.
It's through the Department of State.
Okay.
And that program, unfortunately, is sort of, or at least has sunsetted temporarily. Hopefully there'll be more Brownfield Opportunity Area funds available.
Okay.
But while Candace is looking at that, I just wanted to mention, for those of you who are not familiar with the Consolidated Funding Application Program, everything is now, pretty much with the exception of certain grant programs that go out through the year, like through NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research Development Authority, and some of your programs, but many of them, like the Green Innovations Grant, happen all at the same time in June, and municipalities really have to get on the ball, and Kingston has been on the ball in the last few years to follow up on these and has qualified for a great number of grants, as has the county. We have a $459,000 project at Sophie Finn for green infrastructure, which is...
That's a green infrastructure project. Just learned about that this morning. That's a green infrastructure project the county received. And they're rehabbing Sophie Finn Elementary School, as I understand it. They're installing several of those green infrastructure technologies I mentioned there as part of not only to demonstrate the green infrastructure technology, but I understand they want to also bring, it's next to the high school, right? They want to bring in the students into the technology and interact the students with technology. It's almost, almost like a pre-college type of...
Yes, I think so. Like an early college type program. Yes, I'm not exactly sure what the... but there's also information about that, and we can post a link to that on Kingston Citizens. You had another question, Brad.
One more quick question.
I wanted to answer your question, first of all,
Sure.
because you asked about potential funding sources, and I don't honestly know if this particular program, because I don't work with too much economic development programs, but, and I didn't bone up on it ahead of time. So the Community Development Block Grant Program is a program that's designed to serve and assist the lowest income communities and project areas with a variety of development initiatives. And I'm just going to pop out of here because the one of them is public infrastructure. So there's public infrastructure, there's planning, and so we've got public infrastructure, public facilities, and there's economic development, small business assistance, and micro enterprise, and then planning grants. So I don't know whether economic development, small business assistance, and micro enterprise grants would apply in that situation that you're looking at, but it's certainly worth going on their website and looking that up. And it's real easy. They're administered by the New York State Office for Community Renewal. So if you go to their website or just Google the Community Development Block Grant Program, there's a myriad of ways to get to the descriptive information on these programs. but that may be a source of funding. But it also relates back to your question about joint applications, simply because in this particular program, if you're looking for funding for example, the typical area benefit grant program that gets applied to municipal infrastructure that we frequently go for if it applies, and there's very strict requirements. You have to, it's to serve the poorest of the poor. And it's as you can see, the population has to be under 50,000. But you could go for a single-purpose grant of 600,000, or the county could go for 750,000. But if you're a town or a village or a city, you could go for that single purpose. But if you were a joint applicant, in other words, if there were two municipalities together, then you could go for 900,000, which is just the point I wanted to make in terms of working together to get some money for a joint project. And that may be something I think Kingston's gone for CDBG money in the past.
Well, Kingston is eligible for CDBG funds and gets it every year.
It's
And
entitlement.
It's an entitlement city, not an entitlement county, because we're 182,000.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. And they do it through their HUD housing
Urban
assistance plan, or whatever that is called, right? Yeah. Go ahead. You had another question?
Just one last quick question. What's the percentage? Do you know the percentage of applications that are approved? Is it a high percentage, or is it all applications? Thank you.
Last year, I think we financed every application we received.
That's great. So the window is thank you, Brad. The window is closing on the hardship applications. So if, for example, Kingston wanted to apply for the round that I guess moves forward in 2016, right? They couldn't be they're not listed for this year. How would that work? Let's say
I think Kingston has some projects listed in the drinking water intended use plan.
Right.
They currently do not have any projects listed in the wastewater, or
Okay.
excuse me, clean water, their revolving fund. But the city received an engineering planning grant, $30,000. We closed that grant agreement, we signed it last September, and it is to study the wastewater treatment plant and plan for improvements. Again, the goal there is, with that engineering report that will be funded in part by that grant, they can then give us a listing form, get on the intended use plan, and hopefully receive a score high enough that actually will allow them to apply for hardship financing.
actually I'm thinking more about the potential for getting up to $18 million for the drinking water, right? If you have hardship at 0%.
Right. The hardship financing in the Clean Water Program right now is project costs can't be more than $25 million, and we're providing up to $18 million of the interest-free financing.
So they would have to submit by April 1st for the hardship?
The city is not in a position to apply for a hardship eligibility determination because they're not on the list.
I see.
Step one, get on the list.
Okay. Great.
Okay. And again, to be in a position not to apply for a hardship determination, not only have to be on the list, but your score has to be strong enough relative to the subsidy line.
So I guess somebody's going to be calling you soon.
Okay, that's fine.
Any more questions? Kathy, please say your name.
Thank you. I'm Kathy Nolan with Catskill Mountain Keeper, and really appreciate the presentations. They fill in some gaps and really give us a foundation for conversation, and really helpful. I have a question that's not really a 101 level question, but I want to put it out there, because when we talk about wastewater, I'm really troubled that we're talking about funding through these programs conventional wastewater treatment plants. And conventional wastewater treatment plants, as you both alluded, really focus on removing bacteria, but they don't remove heavy metals, they don't remove pharmaceuticals, they don't remove hormones. However, newer technologies, rebed, sand filtration, what are considered alternative wastewater treatment methods do remove those other compounds, and my understanding is that those plants require much less maintenance, and so your operating costs can drop dramatically, which is really important for some of the communities that these programs are trying to serve. So I guess my question would be, could we get that green infrastructure program or some other type of funding to be directed towards what are considered innovative approaches and especially regarding New York City watershed, where they need that level of filtration that probably could be provided by those alternative technologies.
Before Fred talks to you about the green infrastructure, I just want to point out that most of these funding programs don't prescribe the kinds of technologies that they're going to fund. What they call it is technically approvable, which could translate to be expensive and burdensome and too much tankage from our perspective, but it's technically approvable, doesn't meet regulatory standards. So in that sense, innovative technologies or management systems or small diameter collection systems or wetland treatments, it's all fundable.
The one point, if there is a new technology that's being considered, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, which permits wastewater treatment facilities, allows them to discharge treated wastewater as long as the treated wastewater is of a certain cleanliness, they need to review what is being proposed. And I know from experience that if they're presented with some treatment component they've never seen before, they're going to say, okay, show me this has worked somewhere else in a similar climate. And they're going to want to see all kinds of technical data. It's not impossible, but just as a word of caution in that respect.
And there's another piece to it too, is that they want to know that if it breaks, that you can get the parts easily. And that's a big piece, because some of these technologies, at any rate, that's a big piece of it, is they don't want you to put in something that all of a sudden is going to have a problem down the road that you're going to be really struggling to repair.
Well, let me ask the follow-up then, because what you're describing is a system that doesn't have a way to let communities start to use this better technology.
Right.
And so, again, if there's a green innovation funding stream, if we could get one of these plants funded, built, and tested, then perhaps the others could use that as their pilot and show that there is one in the area that does in fact function. I know we have a small one down at a business at Zumteville. Lighting operates one. So it is possible to do them. It's a smaller capacity setting. But it seems like we keep coming to the same point in the conversation, and I'm asking, and it may be above either of you in terms of your pay grade, but I think we need to do something that gets us into the better technology, especially since it's cheaper.
Well, it's about exposing everyone to the technologies, and you used a great word there, is pilot projects. There is research being done. There are examples that you can point to. What you want to do is get with your regulator, and a lot of this is approved at your local DEC office. So you want that person to be coming with you and looking at these other systems and chatting about what their concerns are and how you might overcome those concerns, because sometimes it can be a pretty individual, and often maybe it is in these kinds of scenarios, is an individual look at what is this really, what are the concerns, and how can we get over them. But the other side of it is being able to point to, as Fred pointed out, systems that are in a similar climate and have been operating outside the state. Maybe you can have examples from elsewhere that would help to bolster your case, but it behooves you to spend some time with the person who's reviewing that and chat about that from a very specific point of view.
Could I follow up? Oh, you have a question. Okay.
Yeah.
Please state your name.
Yeah, thank you. Joanne Steele, Town of Sopas, by the way, Sierra Club. Jankowski had he's passed on, from the town of Lloyd, had a rebed system that was doing very well, because it wasn't enclosed, so it's open to freezing and so forth. So there are certain limitations on it. But, this is the kind of system you're talking about. Are you familiar with it, with Jankowski?
We finance.
This isn't a
Did I get his name right? Jankowitz, that's it, John.
Oh,
Yeah.
so this is a construction wetland. To treat
Yes.
the wastewater. It's not a reed bed for sludge.
Oh, I see. All right, well.
No, thanks.
But part of this is...
That's a good example, because they work, with their local DVC personnel to get that project approved.
Yeah.
So,
And we financed a constructed wetland in Manoa, I think, many years ago.
Mhm. And just last week, I visited the system in Orlando, Florida. Are you familiar with that system?
No.
Well, of course, they don't get winter and
They
things
don't?
freeze.
We have it all.
It doesn't freeze, I mean,
Well, they have to put on a sweater.
It's a whole, several hundred acres.
Right.
And it's now a city park, and it's gorgeous, and the birds love it, and it cleans the water very nicely. And that's
So
another
I
system.
think we have time for one more question, Mary McNamara. Thank you, Joanne.
Yep.
And then I actually wanted to wrap it up with a couple of observations from the two of you and a question about some overview question.
Hi, Fred.
Hello.
Candy, thank you so much. I have a question, and I guess I'm asking if you would speak to it. I don't know if it fits into what you've spoken about tonight. In our region, there are often neighborhoods where the septic system has failed due to all sorts of different reasons. And therefore, to assist those neighborhoods, drinking water districts have been created, and you've brought in drinking water. But to address the septic systems, or the individual systems, it's too expensive to bring in a wastewater plant or a clean water program. And therefore, the nearby surface waters are impacted. And I see it happening more and more and more. And so I just don't know what kind of funding exists to assist individuals, or to, I wonder if there's something that you can mention that you've been involved with or seen.
There's a couple different ways to look at that. One is, if you're looking at it from a community perspective, you can, what EPA has really promoted this decentralized wastewater management concept, and it revolves around having what they call a responsible management entity, and that's someone who can collect the money and pay the bills at the end of the day. So you could have a management district, and there are quite a number actually in the state that manage individual on-site. Oh, I could brought up that presentation and shown you. Many of them are lakeside. In fact, Woodstock, your own town, has a management area where they inspect and repair individual septic systems, and they assess a fee and manage those systems. So that's one way to look at a community without building a municipal plant. You can in fact manage your individual on-sites, and there's a variety of ways that you can look at it. It can go from a simple, you need a permit to operate it, and send us a form once a year that says you got it inspected, or once every 5 years, or whatever it is, to we own and operate and manage your system. So there's a whole host of different ways that you can look at managing individual on-sites. From a perspective of individual on-sites, there's not too much money on the table, and the two programs, or the funding agency is USDA Rural Development, and they have a 502, 504 program for individual homeowners. And if you're very poor and elderly, you can get up to $7,500 one time in your life to that can be used for a variety of home improvement, but septic systems are one of them. And then the other one is a 1% loan, and you have to be pretty darn poor to qualify for that too. And I don't have that offhand, but we can certainly look that up for you. But outside of that, it's awfully hard for individual residents to find the money to do improvements to their septic systems.
And they have to know about that 502, 504 program, and also walk through that application process to even get it. Right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And the CDBG program has a housing improvement pot of money, and improving septic systems or private individual drinking water wells can qualify, are eligible for that type of money.
So just in closing, I think what this is what's been a wonderful and so informative, and it's a model for Kingston citizens, and for which our mission is really to bring information to citizens so they can ask the right questions, find the right information, become more engaged in decisions by their local government. So this really had it all. So I really want to
Yeah.
thank you for giving us such a valuable time and valuable information, and we hope that we can follow up with you if we have further questions. I also just wanted to ask you sort of maybe a more philosophical, if you could just speak to a couple of closing point, which is that Kingston, I think, represents a community that also, in a way, has it all. It's been through the boom and bust cycles of post-war growth and sprawl and wealth and poverty and infrastructure development and infrastructure funding, everything from the reservoir coming through our community with this enormous, what is now sinkhole, this enormous tunnel, a very innovative wastewater treatment plant, fantastic drinking water from the purest of sources, and now we're dealing with the burdens of managing that. So I heard a lot of questions about innovation and ways that we could do things differently. For example, with the flooding of our wastewater treatment plant, we may never, we may have to move it. We may have to come up with a more innovative system. With the potential cost of maintaining our drinking water, we're going to have to figure out ways of financing that. So, could you speak a little bit just to the, how does Kingston look down the road and deal with this challenge, even though you don't necessarily know Kingston? How do we address this challenge as a community? Maybe just some words of wisdom, if you could offer them. Sorry, I didn't put that in the homework assignment.
Many communities are dealing
Or how can any community look to the future to work with the kinds of programs you guys administer? Thank you, Mary.
Well, you need people to actually sit down and focus. Asset management. There's existing infrastructure. That asset management approach forces people to actually look at specific elements of that infrastructure, consider future circumstances, and plan accordingly. No silver bullets come to mind. It's a lot of work. You build infrastructure, as Candace said in the beginning of the presentation, it's got to be maintained, and people come to rely on that service. And the general population, I don't think, fully appreciates, or they don't stop to think, if I didn't have water, how would my life be affected? If I couldn't flush my toilet, how would my life be affected? How valuable is that infrastructure to me, to the quality of life that I have? How much am I paying for it versus how valuable it is to me?
Yeah.
You get the last word.
It really takes the community, is you all need to get together. And when we do project planning, one of the first things we say to people as a technical assistance provider is, you're talking about a project, let's get everybody at the table, let's invite the funders, let's invite the regulators, let's invite the public, let's invite the board, let's all sit down and talk about what we're looking at and what our options are, and more heads are better than one.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much. Thank you all for coming.